I was a nurse for over 22 years in the field of psychiatry.
A supervisor said, "Oh, you're on the ECT rotation next week." And I said, "Oh, well, what do I do?"
The idea is that the shock will subdue the unwanted emotions. In fact, all it ended up with was brain damage.
I underwent electroshock therapy from the ages of 14 to 16.
And I can remember saying, "Why? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me?"
If this is a hospital, why are you locking the doors?
This is about making money at the expense of vulnerable people in our society.
It's one of the most barbaric treatments that the world has ever known.
I don't remember anything anymore. It's too late.
If I ask you what is ECT or electroconvulsive therapy, what do you say?
I have no idea.
I don't know. I have no clue.
I don't know.
I don't know the acronym, but I'm assuming you're talking about like electroshock therapy.
I think I've seen it in the movies.
It's a pretty bad reputation, and it's generally frowned upon nowadays.
Outdated. I don't think they really use that anymore.
It is considered an antiquated technique.
Barbaric.
Brutal.
Some say it was extremely traumatizing.
Did you know they're still doing electroshock?
I really did not know that this was actually still happening.
Oh, they're still doing it? Why?
Can't believe that it's still allowed.
I thought it was against the law.
Di tutte le pratiche disumane della psichiatria, una delle più crudeli e barbariche è la terapia elettroconvulsivante.
People often ask, what is electroshock? And what it is electrocution. That's all it is. They don't call it electrocution. They call it electroconvulsive therapy because it has a magic three-letter acronym, ECT. And the one thing it isn't is therapy.
ECT involves applying electrodes to a patient's scalp and then passing an electrical current through the skull and the brain tissue in order to induce a seizure.
Gli psichiatri scaricano nel cranio elettricità fino a 460 volt per creare intenzionalmente una convulsione che può durare fino a mezz'ora.
It is ultimately imparting large amounts of electricity, many times the voltage you would get even if you stuck your finger into a light socket.
Di fatto, la tech usa una quantità di elettricità sufficiente a far funzionare 2 ascensori, far funzionare una gru o accendere ben 5 luci da stadio.
This is an electroconvulsive therapy machine, also called a shock machine. The purpose of this instrument is to run an electric current through the head of a patient. These are the 2 electrodes. The machine applies a voltage to these 2 electrodes, and that causes a current to flow through the patient's brain, and that constitutes the treatment. So if we set this dial to 100%, then this instrument is set to pass 3 billion electrons through the patient's head during one treatment.
Le macchine per la tech generano quasi 430 volte l'emissione elettrica di un taser. Le macchine sono alquanto rudimentali. Immettono elettricità in un condensatore, che è un accumulatore di energia che immagazzina più del doppio dei volt di una presa elettrica. Premendo il pulsante, gli psichiatri scaricano questa enorme carica elettrica ad alta tensione direttamente nel cranio. Il cervello, tuttavia, è uno strumento estremamente delicato, costituito da circa 100 miliardi di neuroni. Interpreta e trasmette segnali per controllare il corpo, più di 5 trilioni di segnali al secondo. Il cervello funziona con meno di 2 decimi di volt di elettricità. È circa 8 volte meno di una batteria per orologio. Paragonatelo alla tensione potenziale scaricata nel cervello da un solo elettroshock. 2300 volte l'elettricità che il cervello utilizza per funzionare. È violento quanto l'essere colpiti in faccia da un pugile professionista.
And the outcome of that is it destroys brain cells. And the more brain cells you destroy, in theory, the better it is for the person. The biggest mystery of all is why on earth people think that putting bolts of electricity through people's heads is a good idea.
Gli psichiatri usano l'elettroshock per creare ciò che loro chiamano una convulsione terapeutica, ma una cosa del genere non esiste.
When we're in emergency departments and someone comes in with a seizure, that is a bona fide emergency, and we hop right to and try to stop the seizure immediately and its side effects and the things that it causes.
Una convulsione è una scarica elettrica improvvisa nel cervello che causa alterazioni al comportamento, alle sensazioni o alla consapevolezza. La convulsione può derivare da una condizione medica, come l'epilessia, o è causata da forze esterne.
There are seizures that are fever-induced, or if it's alcohol withdrawn, or if it is caused by hallucinogens or by cocaine or methamphetamine. Those things, when the patient stops using them, they improve.
Ma con la TEC, gli psichiatri producono convulsioni nella loro forma più grave. Sono chiamate grande male e derivano da un'attività elettrica anormale in tutto il cervello.
A grand mal seizure is when you go unconscious and have a lot of spasmodic muscular contractions which can hurt you, and you lose control of your bladder and bowels.
They could stop breathing, they could bite their tongue, arch their back to such an extent as to cause a fracture of the spine. It's just a complete disorganization of neurologic function where a person has no control over their body.
The more seizures a person has, the more potential there is for cognitive decline, different neurologic dysfunctions, and more seizures.
Having recurrent seizures potentially reduces the lifespan of that individual. It has an impact on mortality.
Ogni anno 45.000 americani muoiono per convulsioni, tanti quanti ne muoiono in incidenti stradali.
You know, mainstream physicians go to great lengths to prevent seizures. Epilepsy, seizure disorder, is a medical problem that we give medication for in order to prevent any seizures, not just some seizures. The idea is to prevent seizures, to prevent brain damage, because it's recognized that seizure activity promotes brain damage.
Eppure, i dottori dello shock affermano che sia terapeutico e così causano il grande male di proposito.
I became part of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, which is an international watchdog investigating psychiatric abuses, because I've had shock treatment. I know the damage that it caused. I know what damage it did, not just to me, but to my family who had to get me through that. You know, when I was very young, I felt depressed, but what I didn't know is that I actually had an underactive thyroid. I was sent to a psychiatrist by my GP, and he said, well, you need shock treatment. The shock is like a grenade going off in the body. The violence of this, it's like every nerve and every cell is being electrified and with such force. And you come out of it and you know that body is never going to be the same again. When I woke up, I was so disjointed. I didn't know where I was. I was in an incredible amount of pain. And I looked at this person standing next to my bed, and I didn't know who it was. I said, well, who are you? And she said, I'm your mother. Electroshock is torture being passed off as therapy. It is a betrayal.
Come fanno gli psichiatri a farla franca con questo trattamento barbarico? la storia ne è piena. Nel 1920 lo psichiatra Manfred Sackel sosteneva che poteva trattare i malati mentali uccidendo le cellule cerebrali cattive. In realtà creava convulsioni che danneggiavano il cervello usando l'insulina, che uccise il 5% dei pazienti e ne trasformò altri in imbecilli. Il neuropsichiatra ungherese Ladislas Meduna affermava di eliminare le malattie mentali con convulsioni che danneggiavano il cervello usando un potente psicotropo detto metrazolo. Ma anche quello fallì.
Since its inception, psychiatry has really had 4 modalities of treatment that they recircle over and over again. Cut it, burn it, drug it, shock it to the human mind. So when one of their treatments fails, they use it to promote the next one.
Dopo il danno causato dal metrazolo, gli psichiatri passarono alla lobotomia prefrontale come la più innovativa cura miracolosa. Riducendo i cervelli a brandelli con un rompighiaccio, gli psichiatri crearono decine di migliaia di vegetali umani, finché un'accanita opposizione li costrinse ad abbandonare questa procedura mostruosa. Nel frattempo, erano già passati ad una nuova grande scoperta: l'elettricità.
Ugo Streletti wrote in his own documents that he was inspired to develop electroshock by his observation of pigs being led to slaughter. And he saw that the effect of shock on these pigs was to make them more docile and controllable, and it made them not even fight for their own survival.
Nei 2 anni successivi, Cerletti sperimentò l'elettroshock con vari animali.
Streletti progressed to taking homeless people off the street and subjecting them to electric shock.
Secondo Cerletti stesso, la sua prima vittima umana, un senzatetto, lo supplicò di non sottoporlo più allo shock. Un collega di Cerletti, lo psichiatra Lothar Kalinowski, vide gli orrori di quella prima procedura, come ricorda sua moglie.
He came home for lunch, as white as a sheet, and said, "Today I saw something terrible." And he described the first electroshock treatment, and he ended with, "I never want to see this again."
Nonostante l'ovvio danno che gli psichiatri causavano con l'elettroshock, essi diffusero la lucrativa procedura in Europa e negli Stati Uniti. Negli anni 40, l'elettroshock era già ampiamente usato e nella sua forma più rozza.
The original idea was that you would invoke a convulsion. And of course, by definition, if you're having a convulsion, your body is jerking. The problem was that people's bodies were jerking so much, they were breaking their shoulders, they were breaking their necks, bones were being broken.
Ma ciò non impedì agli psichiatri di commercializzare questa procedura brutale.
Many patients have been returned to their homes and jobs who might still be here if it were not for this helpful form of treatment.
ECT has been around since I was a medical student, and I graduated from medical school 60 years ago this year. I considered it as a medical student, having observed a few of them. I guess the kindest thing I could say is barbarian. I thought it was truly one of the most obnoxious things I'd ever seen done to a human being. A huge percentage of these people have brain damage.
Negli anni 50, i danni cerebrali causati dall'elettroshock divennero troppi per essere ignorati. Così gli psichiatri li usarono a loro vantaggio.
Experts like Walter Freeman would say that the reason that ECT works is because it causes brain damage.
Maybe it will be shown that a mentally ill patient can think more clearly and more constructively with less brain in actual operation.
E questo era l'obiettivo dichiarato: meno cervello.
In the 1940s and the 1950s, it was very open in the medical literature that the way electroshock, quote, worked was by brain damage. And yet they went on to say that this was somehow going to end up being beneficial for the patient, when all it really ended up with was brain damage.
Quel marketing cambiò bruscamente nel 1975, quando il film Qualcuno volò sul nido del cuculo espose la brutalità.
The movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest forever changed the course of the public's perception of electroshock therapy because it was so accurately portrayed in the film. It was so obviously torture.
Con l'elettroshock finalmente sotto esame pubblico, la stampa iniziò a documentare le perdite umane.
Just like it's true that you can chemically control someone, yes, you can electrically shock someone out of their so-called crazy mind, but you don't shock them back into their right mind, you shock them into a shocked mind.
Persino il famoso padre dell'elettroshock negli Stati Uniti riconobbe il danno.
The principal complications of ECT are death, brain damage, memory impairment, and spontaneous seizures.
Gonna do another one, Paul? I think so. These are short seizures.
Vista l'indignazione pubblica, gli psichiatri hanno escogitato una nuova cura miracolosa: gli psicotropi. Ma si rivelarono altrettanto inefficaci e pericolosi ed equivalevano a una lobotomia chimica. Gli psichiatri avevano una risposta: riciclare e riconfezionare l'elettroshock.
Electroshock was so abhorrent to the American public that psychiatry came up with a PR campaign to change its name to electroconvulsive therapy. But it is not therapy. It has never been therapy.
Per celare i danni, gli psichiatri aggiunsero anestesia e agenti paralizzanti per sopprimere le convulsioni e i contorcimenti dei loro pazienti. Pubblicizzavano la tech come moderna e lo fanno tutt'oggi.
Well, electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT today, is nothing like what you've seen in the movies. It's a modern medical procedure.
Modern ECT is a lot better than old-fashioned ECT.
It doesn't look at all barbaric now.
Ma dietro l'imbonimento, l'elettroshock è tanto brutale quanto lo è sempre stato. E il risultato rimane lo stesso: una convulsione a livello di grande male e danni cerebrali. L'unico cambiamento è il marketing.
I was a psychiatric nurse for 22 years, and I worked at a facility that did ECTs on adults. I became a whistleblower because I saw things that were being done to patients that were wrong, were unlawful, unethical. We used to tell our patients who would go in for ECT, things are not the same as they used to be back in the 1950s. And at the consultation, we would give out these videos called Shock. And our overall pitch to patients was, we don't know how it works. We just know that it does. We would compare it to rebooting a computer. The patients were led to believe this was somehow or another a miracle. And it wasn't a miracle. I didn't see any miracles, and I was in the business.
Un business dove le macchine per l'elettroshock hanno sempre creato danni cerebrali.
Here we have two electroconvulsive therapy machines. This one is from the 1940s, and this one is a much more modern machine from the 2000s. They both have the same potential to do damage to the brain by running large amounts of electricity through the brain cells with the risk that cells will be damaged or killed.
Eppure, il video promozionale sulla tech mostra che gli psichiatri asseriscono esattamente l'opposto.
ECT is the gold standard treatment for that type of depression. It's a small amount of current. It's nothing like what's in the outlet at home, okay?
Questa è una tipica bugia ampiamente pubblicizzata. A differenza delle macchine per la tech, le prese non danno scariche elettriche. Negli Stati Uniti c'è un fusibile di sicurezza che interrompe la corrente a 0,006 ampere, un'unità che misura l'intensità della corrente elettrica. Invece, le macchine moderne per la tech inviano tra 0,8 e 0,9 ampere, cioè fino a 150 volte oltre il limite legale stabilito per proteggere contro l'elettrocuzione. E questo è ciò che attraversa il cranio del paziente durante la TEC.
I was only 24 years old, and I didn't have anything except what you call the baby blues. My hormones were completely messed up after having a child. My husband was told that the best way to handle this was take me to a psychiatrist. And the next thing I know, they have me in a hospital, and they shocked me. And you would just wake up not knowing where you are or how you got there. And they would send me back, and they would just continue to do this over and over and over and over again. You just got shocked whether you wanted to be shocked or not. They just have to keep hitting your head with that hammer. They gave me 28 shock treatments. They took my soul, my mind, my intellect, my emotions. They put electricity to it. They ran it through my head and literally raped my soul.
La riconfezione moderna della TEC presenta altri pericoli, oltre all'elettricità stessa.
The drug they use as a relaxant in the US before you receive electroshock is also the drug they use for lethal injections.
Questa sostanza si chiama succinilcolina. Paralizza tutti i muscoli del corpo, eccetto il cuore. Data la sua efficacia nel fermare la respirazione, è usata regolarmente nell'esecuzione dei prigionieri condannati a morte. Gli psichiatri la usano per la terapia elettroconvulsivante.
The same drug that's used to kill the person in the execution by paralyzing his breathing also paralyzes his breathing during the shock treatment, which is why the anesthesiologist actually has to ventilate the patient during the procedure. Same drug, same effect.
Modern electroshock is being given under sterile conditions in a regular operating room, looking very much like a regular medical operation, and it's all much more acceptable to anybody who would observe it. In fact, the literature shows that electroshock given under general anesthesia may even be more brain damaging than electroshock as it was given before.
Il motivo? L'anestetico e le sostanze paralizzanti innalzano la soglia convulsiva, richiedendo così una corrente elettrica più intensa per produrre una convulsione. E più trattamenti TEC riceve un paziente, più viene innalzata la soglia. Così gli psichiatri aumentano l'elettricità ogni volta. Questo causa danni cerebrali, sia che il paziente sia anestetizzato o no.
When you give a shock treatment and you give the anesthesia, it does nothing to protect their brain. So you can only protect their body while you're destroying their mind.
It's like this. If you are awake and get hit with a baseball bat, it's obvious that we would feel a lot of pain. But if you're unconscious and get hit with a baseball bat, your body goes through that same trauma. So why are we acting as if in our society that the body doesn't go through trauma just because somebody is conscious or not conscious?
I primi dottori dell'elettroshock usavano 80 volt, una quantità minuscola rispetto a quella data oggi dalle macchine per la TEC. Infatti, un fabbricante raccomanda agli psichiatri di aumentare il dosaggio elettrico fino a 6 volte di più del necessario per produrre una convulsione.
We have here a Spectrum 4000 ECT machine, which is a modern device. It's connected to 2 resistors here, which is typical of the resistance that a patient's head would present to an ECT machine. I'm going to hit the treat button, and we'll be able to see if there's any temperature rise using the heat gun. I'll press the treat button. 112, 118, 120. So, we see that the current that the ECT machine forced through these resistors caused them to heat up from approximately 75 degrees to 120 degrees. The cells can get too hot, they can be damaged, or even die.
If you look at the MRI of their brain, they have areas that have disappeared. They're wasting away, just like somebody with Alzheimer's.
È il risultato di essere colpiti da una corrente 450 volte quella di un pungolo per bestiame. Ma per molte persone il danno è ben più che fisico.
Every time I look in the mirror, I try to wonder who I am. You know, just try to kind of put the pieces together of who I used to be. I was started an antidepressant, and then it was just multiple cocktails of drugs, of antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety pills, sleeping medication, stimulants. And I was just deemed treatment resistant. And then at 21, I was given electroshock. I went through a neurocognitive testing 6 months after, and I lost approximately about 50 points of IQ. My IQ is measured at 78, which I think that 75 is rendered mentally retarded. It's a constant identity crisis that I deal with. I do consider shock treatment torture because it damaged me physically and mentally in every way, and it's just continue. It's like every day I'm reliving the shock because I don't know who I am. They say that it's safe and effective, but I think I'm living proof that it's not.
Gli psichiatri non possono asserire che la tech è sicura o efficace, perché la loro conoscenza dei fondamenti stessi è estremamente carente.
Electrical engineers understand how electricity works, and biomedical engineers understand the effects that electric currents can have on human tissue. Psychiatrists, however, typically don't receive the kind of training to make them understand electricity, what it is, what it does, what it can do to the human body. So we have in this case an operator who is merely trained to set the knobs and push the buttons without understanding the ramifications of what he's doing.
Uno psichiatra, esaminato in tribunale sulla sua conoscenza dell'elettricità, lo dimostrò.
What is an amp?
What is an amp? It's been a long time since high school physics, and I couldn't give you a scientific definition of what an amperage is.
Do you have a definition of a volt?
A volt. A volt might be the power at which an amperage is pushed through an electrical wire.
You're not quite sure what these terms mean, are you?
I'm not quite sure.
One of the settings that you put on your dials on your machine is hertz, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you know what the term hertz actually means?
I don't.
Do you tell your patients about your level of understanding of the resistance of the brain to the electricity you're sending through it?
No.
Do you think they might want to know before they lay their head down on the operating table to have you give them shock treatment?
No one's ever asked.
Prima della sua deposizione, il dottor Joseph Johnson aveva dato più di 1800 elettroshock. Ma il dottor Johnson non è l'unico ad essere deplorevolmente ignorante sui principi e i termini dell'elettricità. Il programma di studi psichiatrici contiene poco sul soggetto. E gli psichiatri ammettono di non sapere come funziona il cosiddetto trattamento.
Electroshock is as much art as science because how it works is still a mystery.
Do you know how it works, Jonathan?
I don't think anybody really knows how it works.
There's no specific answer to that question.
People don't understand why this works or how it works.
How does it work? Well, as a field, we are focusing on researching that question.
We don't really know, is what you're saying.
We don't have the complete answers. However, it's not a complete cure.
Come gli psichiatri la facciano franca è un altro mistero.
a cardiologist, orthopedic surgeons, other physicians in other specialties really just couldn't get away with using tools of their trades with knowing so little about it as shock doctors do about what they're doing.
E tuttavia, gli psichiatri la fanno franca ogni volta che eseguono questa procedura.
Psychiatrists will tell you that they don't know exactly how ECT works, but what they do know is that it causes brain damage, organ failure, it can kill someone, it can cause seizures. They do know that much, but they can't tell us how it actually works.
Lo psichiatra Richard Abrams, comproprietario della fabbrica di macchine per la tech, Somatics, ammise la propria ignoranza sotto giuramento.
Do you have any understanding as to the mechanics of how ECT works?
I do not.
All right. Would you agree that that's the general state of the industry still today? That the practitioners of ECT don't have an understanding of how it works?
That's correct.
Richard Abrams è la stessa persona che scrisse il testo standard sulla tech. Lo stesso psichiatra che ammette di non sapere nulla su come funzioni la tech ha scritto un libro di testo che sembra scientifico e autorevole, mentre fabbrica macchine per la tech e le vende in tutto il mondo. Nel frattempo, i praticanti dell'elettroshock usano queste macchine sulle loro vittime con un voltaggio superiore a quello di una macchina da stampa industriale.
They see that as their job. Give the patient the drugs and they push the red button and zap him. But they don't study the underlying science because there isn't any.
My personal experience as a psychiatry resident was I was doing a rotation. All of a sudden my supervisor says, "Oh, you're on the rotation for ECT next week." And I said, "Oh, well, what do I do? I've had no training, no instruction whatsoever." I arrive at the room, I walk in, there's the anesthetist, there's the nurse, there's the equipment, the patient's wheeled in, and now I have to set the settings on the machine. So I look at the log and I say, "Oh, well, the last time this person had a treatment, the settings were this and this." So I adjust the dials, person gets treated. Next patient who comes in, it's their first course of ECT, the very first treatment. So there's nothing in the logbook. So then I go, I guess I'll just do halfway in between the last two patients. Set the dials, off we go. That's literally the experience I had. No supervision, no follow-up, nothing.
Persino uno psichiatra esperto non sa quanta elettricità produrrà una convulsione in un nuovo paziente. Così si procede per tentativi. Prendete per esempio Charles Kellner, un eminente psichiatra della tech che faceva dimostrazioni alla TV nazionale.
Preparing the sites for the electrodes for the delivery of the stimulus.
Okay, Mark.
Okay, treating. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Still didn't get it?
No.
Got it. Okay. Now she's having a seizure. Yeah.
Half an hour after her seizure, Terry is in recovery.
Okay. It's okay. Your treatment went really well. I want you to know that, okay?
The very next day, Terry is back.
Do you recognize me? No, I'm Dr. Kellner.
Infliggere 3 shock di fila che danneggiano il cervello non è solo un'aggressione. La tech menoma chiunque la subisca. Uno dei sostenitori più zelanti della tech, lo psicologo Harold Sackheim, affermò sotto giuramento:
Altered cognition is the most common side effect of ECT. That memory loss occurs, it's universal, and in some individuals it can be profound.
Cognizione alterata non è una cosa da poco. È un peggioramento profondo dei centri di livello più alto del cervello, che controllano la consapevolezza emozionale, l'intuizione di sé, la capacità di giudizio e la memoria. E la perdita della memoria è la prima cosa che le vittime notano.
it wasn't until I was at Shoal Creek that I saw a psychiatrist. And little did I know, after I signed myself in freely, that I couldn't leave for 72 hours. I wouldn't leave my room. I couldn't be around other people. I was terrified, and every time I went for another treatment of ECT, I got more and more paranoid. My head was exploding for days. I couldn't do anything but fall on the bed and sleep for 16 hours or something. I'd have to write everything down and then remember where I wrote it. My family would tell me, look at your book. Look at your book. I had to carry this book around with me all the time. My first service dog I got because if I left the apartment to go check the mail, I would get lost. I couldn't remember the number of the apartment. I'd just wander around. When I applied for disability, I had to go to the office and take some kind of test. I couldn't tell them my name. I couldn't tell them where I lived. I couldn't tell them how to get to my house. I couldn't tell them the president. I couldn't tell them anything. And my older sister told me that they asked her, is she like this all the time? And she said, pretty much.
I spent 30 years working in the psychiatric system, principally as a clinical psychologist. And during that time, I saw numerous patients who'd received electroshock. I spoke with numerous psychiatrists who delivered electroshock. And it was really after that that I became kind of intrigued as to what was going on and why were these people delivering it. And more to the point, why did so many of my patients have long-term memory problems? There's a thing called anterograde amnesia, which is you lose your memory for everything after the shock, so you don't create new memories. And then there's retrograde amnesia, which is you lose memories for things immediately before the shock.
There's only been a few studies done in the last 33 years on permanent amnesia over the long term, 6 months or greater. And what they found, when they look for it, they find it. But they tend just not to look for it.
They knew about permanent memory loss a long time ago, and they actually instructed the field to say that it wasn't permanent, that it wasn't long-term, to use words such as transient, words such as spotty, words such as temporary, to minimize these adverse events.
Ma fuori dalle cliniche, gli psichiatri confessano liberamente che la perdita di memoria è una caratteristica principale della TEC.
Clearly there are risks with ECT. That's been well established for a long time. Some people have regretted doing it because of memory impairment.
Memory loss occurs when patients get electroconvulsive therapy.
The amnesia problem with memory.
They have some memory problems that persist more than we'd like.
While someone's going through ECT, they have pretty profound memory loss.
Sometimes, they can impact the patient pretty severely.
It's like a little volcano inside the brain.
You get more bang for your buck with ECT. If you pardon the pun, you know.
Ma gli psichiatri raramente fanno tali confessioni oneste ai loro pazienti.
The industry has variously represented that ECT's benefits exceed its disadvantages. They don't deny that there are disadvantages to ECT, they minimize them. It's a sales pitch.
Ed è fabbricato dalle ditte di pubbliche relazioni che forniscono argomenti agli psichiatri addestrati per i media.
ECT is the fastest and most effective treatment that we have.
It's the most effective treatment that we have today for severe depression.
Single most effective treatment we have for depression.
Is the most effective
really
treatment.
Effective for depression. It's
ECT
more effective
is
than
more
medication.
effective than antidepressant
More
therapy.
effective than many of the psychotropic
ECT
medications.
remains number one.
More than medication, more than therapy, more than ketamine.
One of the most effective treatments for anything in medicine.
Ma i loro slogan sono una presa in giro, non sono scienza.
Shock psychiatrists blame all kinds of adverse effects of ECT on the patient or their underlying mental condition. For example, memory loss or inability to make executive decisions are blamed on the person's underlying depression when it's actually an effect of the ECT.
Oltre ad infliggere lesioni alla testa, la TEC può provocare danni in tutto il corpo.
That's why
When you get ECT, there's a crash cart there in case the heart goes into an abnormal rhythm. And if that happens, the doctors have that there in order to bring the person back to life.
Nonostante molti casi di danni documentati causati dalla tech, gli psichiatri li ignorano come situazioni casuali. Ignorano anche i propri studi, che dimostrano che non c'è nessun beneficio nel fare la tech.
Sham ECT is basically placebo control, where the person's wheeled into the room, they're put to sleep, electrodes are put on their head, buttons pushed, but there's no electricity. And so the patient doesn't know if they got real or sham. There's only 12 or 13 of those kind of studies ever. And when you pool them together, there is absolutely no evidence anywhere that people who've had ECT are better off 1 month later.
Ma chi riceve frequentemente la vera tech viene di solito intrappolato nella macina dell'elettroshock.
Just like with psychiatric drugs and in the psych hospital, they keep coming back. We used to call them frequent flyers. They would be readmitted. We see the same patients coming in and out.
Ma gli psichiatri come Sarah Lisenby incolpano il paziente per la ricaduta invece del fallimento del trattamento.
Is without a maintenance treatment, you can have rapid relapse, but with maintenance treatment, you can have sustained relapse prevention.
Can I ask you, Dr. Lisenby, what you think the minimum length of time is that is required to demonstrate an effect of the device?
Well, I guess I'm saying that I guess I'm trying to answer by analogy. ECT is an effective intervention without any form of relapse prevention. Patients will relapse very quickly.
La verità su ciò che gli psichiatri chiamano ricaduta è questa. Il trauma nel cervello causato dalla tech è notevole. Equivale all'impatto causato dalla caduta di un blocco di cemento di 18 kg da 2,3 metri sulla testa. Per guarire da questo danno catastrofico, il cervello rilascia delle sostanze che danno euforia. Ma questa svanisce rapidamente ed i problemi della persona ritornano, spesso con forza. E quando questo succede, gli psichiatri prescrivono più tech. Lo chiamano mantenimento, continuazione o booster della tech.
The nature of depression is that it is usually a relapsing illness.
Regular recurring ECT treatments may be needed.
Many people often go on to get what's called maintenance.
Ongoing maintenance therapy is provided.
And then you need another 10 ECT.
This is going to be a repeated pattern of these people are going to be on courses of treatment that will last for the rest of their lives.
And, you know, the average today is about 35 treatments of shock every year. And of course it doesn't work, it just makes them worse and it damages.
Gli psichiatri e i produttori della macchina per la tech, Richard Abrams e Conrad Swartz, ammisero la mancanza di risultati in una lettera all'FDA. Non sorprende che le valutazioni effettuate settimane o mesi dopo il completamento della serie di trattamenti intensi di tech di solito non dimostrino un significativo vantaggio dell'uso della tech. La tech non solo danneggia il cervello e distrugge la funzionalità del corpo, può anche essere fatale.
It can make people suicidal, either just contemplating suicide or actually going out and taking their lives.
The man who left an indelible impression on English literature is dead. Ernest Hemingway died of a self-inflicted wound at his Ketchum, Idaho home.
Lo scrittore Ernest Hemingway, vincitore del premio Nobel, si suicidò poco dopo aver subito una serie di elettroshock. Prima della sua morte, scrisse: «Che senso ha rovinare la mia mente e cancellare la mia memoria, che è il mio capitale, e rendermi disoccupato? Era una cura brillante, ma abbiamo perso il paziente».
And we know that by doing ECT, the suicide rate, you're 13 times more likely to commit suicide if you do the ECT than if you had never done it.
I was bullied at school, being abused at home. So then, the doctor tells me, well, we want to try a new treatment with you. She's like, we call it ECT. I was 17 years old when I received ECT for the first time. Here I am, I'm a scrawny 110-pound kid, and you got these guys that are like ex-military UFC-looking fighters just grabbing me, throwing me in a room, and stabbing me with an injection, putting leather restraints on my arms. Then all I remember is waking up in my room. My head felt like it was on fire. It was like the worst headache I've ever had. And then I started panicking because I didn't know who I was. But I don't remember my name. I don't remember anything. I don't remember what happened the day before. It was, I just remember anything at all. When I came back, I wasn't used to my home, my neighborhood, nothing. And the next 4 years I blinked. And it got to the point where I got fed up with it. So I took like half of my Prozac and I just, put it in my mouth, put myself like a self-induced coma. I remember I was just sitting in my bed all day, cutting myself, trying drowning myself, hanging myself, thinking of ways I could end my life, putting a plastic bag around my head, tying it, and going under my blankets, just waiting. I already, even to this day, I'm still suicidal. I mean, if you don't care about your memories or your life or anything like that, oh yeah, go ahead, do it. If you love pain, you love headaches and all that, yeah, go do it. But, if you want to remember your life, you want to remember your friends and all the good times, yeah, don't do it.
One of the dangers of ECT is death. That's known. It's actually reported in MedWatch reports in the FDA. You had a death that occurred to a patient just hours after they received ECT. So, does ECT cause death? Yes, it does.
Researchers at Brown University looked at the effect of ECT in the elderly. They looked at depressed elderly patients who were given ECT and compared them to depressed elderly patients who got usual medical treatment. And they found that the death rate after just 1 year among the ECT recipients was 27%, compared to an over 96% survival rate among the people who were treated without electric shock.
Ovvero, gli anziani sottoposti alla TEC morivano ad un ritmo 6 volte maggiore di coloro che non l'avevano ricevuta.
So one of the demonstrations I like to do with ECT is show the difference in the amount of electricity based on the age. So if a person is 20 years old and you do the electroshock, this is how long it is. If a person is 70 years old, this is the length. So the longer the electroshock is based on how old you are.
So 2/3 of the recipients of electroshock are women. Something like 3/4 of them are over the age of 60. I think the oldest person to receive electroshock was 104.
La morte prematura non è limitata agli anziani. Uno studio di oltre 3.000 pazienti di ogni età sottoposti alla TEC ha scoperto che essi avevano un più alto tasso di mortalità indipendentemente dalla causa. Persino l'Associazione Psichiatrica Americana riporta che la TEC uccide. Tuttavia, sostengono che è solo 1 su 10.000 pazienti, una supposizione di Richard Abrams, lo psichiatra che fabbrica e vende le macchine per la TEC. Le cifre effettive. Lo Stato del Texas riporta che 1 su 350 pazienti morì entro 2 settimane dopo aver ricevuto la TEC. È 50 volte più elevato del tasso di omicidi negli Stati Uniti e 30 volte più alto di quello dichiarato dall'APA. Persino quando i pazienti rifiutano la TEC, nella maggior parte del mondo non sono ancora al sicuro.
So if a person determines, I don't want ECT, the psychiatrist can actually go to a judge who can determine that he's not competent to make his own medical decisions
and override his own decision about what he wants done to himself and his body, and actually deliver him electroconvulsive therapy against his will. I was assigned to a psychiatrist who was very aggressive in his manner in trying to get me to agree to do ECT. You know, I was skeptical and I said, no, I don't want to do it. The psychiatrist pretty much threatened me. He said that if I don't agree to it, then they can get a court order. My family actually sided with me. They said that they shouldn't do this to me against my wishes. Basically, all the doctors said that I needed to have ECT and that I was not in my right mind to refuse. The probate court judge agreed with them and he issued the court order, and that was how they started the forced ECT on me. I was pretty much tortured. I was being forced to have this treatment. I didn't like it, I didn't want it, and when I was honest with the doctors about how it affected me and I told them, they just interpreted that as part of my depression. I realized that the only way to stop this was to start lying, so that's what I did. What was done to me was really, frankly, evil. It's a barbaric treatment, and that it shouldn't be done to people against their will like it was done to me.
With psychiatry, like most of their treatments, these are frequently given without consent of the patient, because it is the only quote-unquote medical field where their authority supersedes your rights, an individual's rights to consent to treatment.
If it breaks their skin like an injection, or if it's a drug that you feed into them one way or another, or if it's electroshock therapy, that is violating a person's sovereignty over his own body. A person has a right to their own body. They have a right not to be violated.
Il relatore speciale dell'ONU sulla tortura è molto preciso nella sua condanna della tech coercitiva.
Against your will, electroshock therapy is, in my opinion, absolutely prohibited. I have seen so many persons who have been subjected to electroshocks in order to extract a confession or information, etc. And it's one of the worst feelings of pain you can imagine if this electric current is really runs through your body. So it's the contractions. It might even lead to death. In my opinion, they are torture.
E alcuni usi della tech dei primi tempi erano letteralmente tortura. Nel periodo nazista, gli psichiatri tedeschi davano scariche letali di tech ai malati mentali ritenuti non idonei per la vita. Nella guerra d'Algeria degli anni 50, gli psichiatri davano l'elettroshock ai prigionieri prima di interrogarli. La CIA addestrò i servizi di sicurezza marocchini sull'uso della macchina per l'elettroshock da usare nelle interrogazioni. Gli psichiatri dell'Unione Sovietica usavano l'elettroshock per punire i dissidenti politici che rifiutavano i dettami del partito.
In South Africa, ECT was used as a torturous method of treatment for a group that mental health considered to be animals, because they actually had the idea that if you were black, you couldn't feel pain.
One of the original ECT devices, which was actually manufactured in the UK, called the Page Russell, was used for torture in Arabic countries and was used on political prisoners. So how do you call something help or treatment when it's been used for torture?
Gli psichiatri hanno anche introdotto l'elettroshock nel campo del cosiddetto controllo della mente.
In a moment, we will examine the closest experimentation to brainwashing that we have uncovered.
L'infame psichiatra Ewen Cameron condusse esperimenti mettendo la gente in un sonno profondo comatoso, usando psicotropi ed elettroshock ad alto voltaggio, riducendola a uno stato infantile.
I thought this was the coldest and most impersonal treatment that anybody could give to anybody in the world.
Un fervente sostenitore del trattamento di Cameron fu lo psichiatra australiano Harry Bailey,
Dr. Harry Bailey studied a treatment called deep sleep therapy, and it involved knocking a person unconscious with a cocktail of psychiatric drugs, usually barbiturates and sedative hypnotics. And while they were in that comatose state, they were given electroshock treatment, sometimes twice daily. The patients were dying. There were 48 deaths. Over 1,100 patients were subjected to this. They all had brain damage. They all had personality changes. They had blood clots. They were seriously damaged by this so-called treatment.
Tonight, why was deep sleep therapy ever allowed to happen at Chelmsford?
The analogy with the appalling medical experimentation by Nazi doctors is difficult to avoid.
Certainly the information that we gave to the Attorney General's Department showed clearly that very often patients were given electric shock treatment without their consent.
The question has remained ever since then, why hasn't the matter been satisfactorily resolved?
CCHR, along with the Chelmsford Victims Action Group, got local media. There were demonstrations on the steps of Parliament demanding a government inquiry into deep sleep treatment. And we worked with legislators and we agitated for reforms, and it actually produced some of the biggest reforms Australia's ever seen.
Good evening. There will be a royal commission into the controversial Chelmsford Hospital deep sleep treatment.
Let me tell you that this royal commission will get to the bottom of all of the abuses that have gone on in the system.
And it was through our investigations, through the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, working with patients and their families who had undergone this deep sleep treatment, we ended up having deep sleep treatment banned.
Oggi gli psichiatri mirano a dare l'elettroshock a nuovi settori della popolazione. Alla donna incinta viene detto che la TEC è sicura per lei e per il bambino non ancora nato.
When a woman is pregnant, she shouldn't drink coffee, she's not supposed to smoke. There's a whole list of things that are bad for the baby when it's in the prenatal stage. However, pregnant women are getting electric shock, causing miscarriages.
It boggles the mind that something like this can be given to a woman who is growing a baby in her body, that of course the electricity is going to affect her and her unborn child.
I bambini sono un obiettivo sempre maggiore per gli psichiatri della TEC.
It's a horrible idea to give electroconvulsive therapy to children. We don't know what the long-term effects are, but it only makes sense that repeated seizures like that could cause cognitive difficulties, learning difficulties, and damage to the nervous system as it's developing.
If you're going to destroy an adult brain, just think what you could do with a child brain. You could do much more damage. Take away his whole future.
C'è un'ottima ragione scientifica del perché i bambini non dovrebbero mai subire la TEC.
In a fully matured brain, there are between 60 and 90 billion nerve cells. And when they die, they are not replaced. But in children, the brain is still developing. So if a cell is killed in an adult, that is one less brain cell the person has to operate with. But if a cell is killed in a child, then not only does he lose that cell, but he loses all the other cells that cell would have created during the development of the brain. So ECT is more dangerous to children even than it is to adults.
Right now in the United States, through Freedom of Information Act, CCHR has uncovered the fact that 16 states are currently electroshocking children and adolescents, and 5 of those states are electroshocking children aged 0 to 5.
Psychiatrists give electroshock to children all over the world. In Australia, children as young as 4 receive electroshock. In Turkey, 9-year-old children receive it explicitly as a punishment.
I'm an ex-law enforcement officer. Much milder things can land people in jail than to send a child through that type of trauma. We have a society where a parent can't even spank a child, but psychiatrists can put 400 volts through the brain of a child.
Under the definition, it's abuse in no other way. You are inflicting harm to a child under the guise of treatment.
L'Organizzazione Mondiale della Sanità emise una regola ferrea. Non ci sono elementi che giustifichino l'uso della TEC su minori e quindi dovrebbe essere proibito per mezzo della legge. Nonostante ciò, sia il presidente che il direttore generale dell'Associazione Psichiatrica Americana hanno formalmente esortato il capo dell'FDA di rendere la tech ampiamente disponibile su bambini e adolescenti di ogni età. È una campagna che mira ai più indifesi, con poca sorveglianza del governo.
One of the things that the marketing campaign does so brilliantly is to talk about electroshock as a treatment of last resort. That is what we call a lie. There are psychiatrists in the States who recommend electroshock for all sorts of things, including inscriptions like autism, ADHD, learning disability, and they recommend that that is the first treatment that people are given, not the last, not the end of the line.
Oggi, negli Stati Uniti, i regolamenti federali richiedono che tutti i fabbricanti di dispositivi riportino eventi avversi della tech. Ma i fabbricanti di dispositivi raramente obbediscono.
So you have manufacturers that know about adverse events, that have logs of adverse events, that didn't report adverse events to the FDA. And the FDA has done very little to actually enforce those regulations.
E quando finalmente fecero il rapporto, fu solo 17 anni dopo. E quelli che esistono sono spesso raccapriccianti. Ictus, catatonia, un feto ucciso, la testa di un uomo in fiamme. E questi sono solo alcuni degli eventi avversi.
My husband Jose Topete had ECT. They told us what a great thing it was and how it was going to help our family and help Jose. Jose had 23 treatments of ECT, and during the ECT treatments, he did not get better at any time. In fact, he had a breakdown at one time after the first week of ECT. We didn't realize that his whole memory was gone until after ECT was over. And one of the just terrible times was we live in a rural area that has a pond, and we have lots of frogs and bullfrogs. Well, we heard the frogs making a lot of racket, and Jose said, "What's that noise?" And we said, "Oh, it's just the frogs." And he said, "What's a frog?" He doesn't know his parents. He doesn't know his siblings. He has no memory of our marriage, the birth of his children, taking care of his family, his job. He was a California state tax auditor. He had no memory of what California tax law was. Everything was wiped out of his mind. His children, me, he didn't know who we were. At first I thought, okay, we'll be able to just teach him who we are and make him love us again. And that didn't work like that. It's been a real heartbreak for all of us.
Malgrado tutto il danno che ha causato, la macchina per la tech non è mai stata adeguatamente regolamentata.
What we have here is a basic electronic device. It generates pulses for the purpose of delivering an electric shock. There's nothing medical about it, it's just a pulse generator.
Questa macchina per la tech fu acquistata online, senza licenza, senza verifiche sul passato della persona, senza domande, solo una carta di credito.
In 1976, the United States Food and Drug Administration was given authority by Congress to regulate devices such as these. This device, of course, was never tested by the FDA because it's too old. This one was used starting in the 1940s. When the FDA gained control over these devices, they didn't start regulating ECT devices because they were already in use. Any device that was already being used did not need to be tested, as long as it's substantially equivalent to the devices that were used when the FDA took control.
The FDA allowed it to be grandfathered in, meaning it didn't require any proof of efficacy or clinical trials for safety and efficacy. They just let it stay on the market.
Così ora gli psichiatri l'hanno vinta in entrambi i modi. Da un lato sostenevano che la macchina per l'elettroshock era sostanzialmente equivalente a quella degli anni 40 e allo stesso tempo promuovevano la tech come moderna, nuova e migliorata. Un chiaro inganno. Ma nel 1979 l'FDA classificò la macchina per la tech come classe 3, il che significa che era ad alto rischio e doveva ricevere un collaudo di sicurezza. L'FDA dette ai fabbricanti 3 anni di tempo per dimostrare che fosse sicura.
So, if ECT wants to claim safety and effectiveness, they should be showing by clinical studies that it's safe and effective. They haven't. And it isn't because they can't afford to. There's plenty of their own consultants that work for big league universities that get plenty of funding to do it. They choose not to because ECT is not effective.
Has Somatics ever conducted any studies to determine whether any brain injury could be caused by ECT?
Somatics has never conducted any studies of any kind. We're not in the business of doing studies of traumatic brain injury. We sell thymotrons.
Per evitare ogni possibilità di collaudo, gli psichiatri fecero pressioni all'FDA per riclassificare la macchina come classe 2, una categoria che include articoli come siringhe, lenti a contatto e preservativi.
There's nothing else in class 2 that causes brain damage, cardiac standstill, stroke, brain hemorrhage, seizures. It's really ridiculous for them to even be considered as class 2. The reason they want to put the ECT machine in class 2 is because it wouldn't have to be tested for safety or effectiveness.
Grazie alla protesta pubblica, l'FDA programmò un'udienza per determinare la validità della riclassificazione. Superstiti della tech si recarono a Washington per testimoniare.
I argued with a psychiatrist and dumped me in the locked ward and shocked me 5 times. I became violent. I tore my nails off, dragged them under the door. And he said after 5 times, sometimes they don't help.
I had over 80 shock treatments. And yes, they called them maintenance treatments, but I don't remember my wedding day. I don't remember my husband putting a ring on my finger.
When I was given an IQ test a few months after the ECT and asked the population of the United States, I answered 1,000. When he asked me to guess again, I answered 2,000. I remember having no idea where to find the answer in my head.
Il gruppo consultivo concordò ampiamente che le macchine per la tech dovrebbero rimanere nella classe 3 e ricevere il collaudo di sicurezza. Ma l'FDA, rappresentata da Jeffrey Shuren e la sua collega Malvina Edelman, ignorarono le raccomandazioni del gruppo consultivo e ampliarono l'uso della macchina della tech come dispositivo di classe 2.
3,000 submissions were sent into the Food and Drug Administration talking about the destructiveness of electroshock. The FDA and the APA and other psychiatrists want to make ECT more broadly available, despite the fact that all these people are saying no, despite tens of thousands of people saying electroshock is damaging, that it can actually kill you, that it destroys their life.
I recently started ECT treatments, electroconvulsive therapy. I was supposed to have one today, but I went ahead and canceled it. Because I'm stupid now. Or I'm definitely not as smart as I used to be. Spent a lot of time and money on education because I wanted to be smart. And I was smart. I don't remember anything anymore. Right now, this is my life. not on the sheet. I'm not remembering it. When it came to ECT, it was out of sheer desperation. And I didn't research it. And I just trusted. And now that I'm where I am, I don't have the brain capacity to research it. It's too late.
Gli psichiatri e i fabbricanti della macchina per la tech sono ben consapevoli dei danni che provocano. Quindi perché continuano a farlo?
We look at the cost of manufacturing one of these machines. It has 3 of these transformers. They might be $40 a piece. And these parts probably could be collected for a total of about $50 or $60 for the components. The printed circuit board could probably be manufactured for less than $100 in quantity. All of these resistors are pennies a piece, and the integrated circuits are normally less than $1 a piece. So we see here a device that could be manufactured in quantity for between $500 and $1,000, including parts and labor.
E con gli apparati di elettroshock venduti a quasi $20.000, il guadagno è enorme. Inoltre, gli psichiatri si beneficiano profumatamente prescrivendo la tech, perché devono essere presenti e quindi vengono pagati per ogni seduta di elettroshock.
It costs about $2,500 per session. So if you do the math, and let's just say for simple mathematics, the person has 10 sessions initially, that's $25,000.
I costi per i ricoverati sono ancora più redditizi, fino a $120.000 per paziente.
We would start usually around 6 a.m. We would see up to 13 patients a day. It was almost like an assembly line mentality, kind of get them in, get them worked up, get the treatment, and get them out, get the next one in, get the treatment, do the recovery, get them out. It was a very lucrative business. Big money maker.
Lo psichiatra che esegue l'elettroshock rastrella circa il doppio di chi non lo fa e raggiunge queste cifre lavorando solo poche ore alla settimana.
It's been calculated that in America, psychiatrists doing a relatively small amount of electroshock, possibly 20 sessions a week, will earn anything up to an additional $300,000 per year.
E con 100.000 americani all'anno che ricevono la tech, gli psichiatri hanno creato un impero dell'elettroshock da $5,4 miliardi nei soli Stati Uniti. Più soldi del bilancio nazionale di oltre metà delle nazioni sulla Terra.
It has nothing to do with medicine. It has nothing to do with helping the patients. It's just a money machine.
Con così tanti soldi da rastrellare, l'industria dell'elettroshock è piena di conflitti di interesse. Il volto di questi conflitti? Lo psicologo e accanito promotore della tech, Harold Sackheim.
Has any manufacturer of ECT devices ever given you money?
I've received reimbursements in honoraria.
How much money have you received?
$10,000, maybe $15,000, $20,000, $20,000, $25,000, $70,000.
Inoltre, Sackheim ha ricevuto almeno $9 milioni in fondi dal governo per fare le ricerche sulla tech. Un conflitto di interessi che conduce all'Istituto Nazionale della Salute Mentale degli Stati Uniti, NIMH, dove il direttore della ricerca sulla tech, lo psichiatra Matthew Rudolpher, sovrintende i fondi. Non solo Rudolpher ha sommerso di denaro le istituzioni di Harold Sackheim per anni, ma loro due hanno scritto un capitolo su un manuale della tech. Alla NIMH c'è anche Sarah Lisenby, ha avuto legami finanziari con 10 differenti fabbricanti di dispositivi psichiatrici. Il suo mentore era Harold Sackheim. Poi c'è Richard Weiner, dell'Associazione Psichiatrica Americana. Weiner era lo psichiatra leader dell'APA Task Force, che aveva raccomandato di escludere i danni cerebrali dal modulo di consenso informato dell'APA per la TEC, con queste parole: non è necessario che i danni cerebrali siano inclusi come rischio potenziale. Weiner fu anche consulente per i 2 maggiori fabbricanti americani della macchina per la TEC, Mecta e Somatics. Somatics è di proprietà degli psichiatri Richard Abrams e Conrad Swartz, che fanno pagare fino a $20.000 per un apparato per la TEC. Il rapporto dell'APA Task Force di Richard Weiner sulla TEC citò più di 60 articoli di Abrams, e tutti i giocatori chiave invischiati in questa rete di corruzione sono i membri del consiglio redazionale del The Journal of ECT. Abrams, Swartz, Lisenby, Weiner, Sackheim, Rudolfer, Kellner e Fink.
When you invite the foxes to watch the hen house and act like you're really guarding the place, well, it's really just a violation of public trust.
E la vita della gente viene distrutta.
I had problems before I had shock treatments, and I would say I have more problems now.
I didn't receive any help from the ECT that the psychiatrist gave me. It destroys you.
Shock treatment felt like torture to me. I say it's like torture. It felt like it destroyed my spirit.
It beat all the abuse I even experienced. It beat the rapings, the molestations. It beat everything because it did so much to me psychologically and physically.
Prior to ECT, I never thought about suicide. After the second round of ECT, I definitely was considering it.
ECT stands for electroconvulsive torture. Because obviously, it didn't help my sister at all.
Psychiatry destroyed my father because it destroyed his purpose, and he committed suicide in the end.
Is it the responsibility of the psychiatrist performing ECT to make sure that no harm comes to his patient?
The answer to that is no.
Nell'ultima ora, gli psichiatri hanno somministrato oltre 1 migliaio di elettroshock. L'ammontare delle loro vittime è 1 milione di persone nel mondo ogni anno. E con dottori dell'elettroshock che lavorano sodo per eliminare le restrizioni sulla TEC, nessuno è al sicuro.
It's unconscionable, some of the things that I've seen, particularly as it pertains to very small children.
The way they've treated people is just unbelievable. I couldn't see treating my worst enemy that way.
Oh my God, I don't want that to happen to anybody. It brings tears to my eyes. It's frightening.
Just common sense will tell you that you don't need to put that electricity to their brain. I'm adamantly opposed.
Per la TEC esiste solo una soluzione, un trattamento che non è altro che una elettrocuzione.
It's a complete travesty as a civilized society to do these type of torturous, barbaric procedures.
ECT has to be stopped. We cannot continue to do this to people. We have safe and effective treatments that are out there. We do not need ECT.
It's just cruel and inhumane to be able to send people through that type of torture.
We're standing up and saying that this experimental dosing with ECT cannot occur anymore.
It's just assault and battery.
It's more torture than it is a medical treatment.
It should be illegal.
ECT should be banned.
ECT should have been banned 50 years ago. The sooner the better.
Può essere fatto. La TEC è già stata del tutto o in parte vietata in diversi stati e nazioni in tutto il mondo.
We got rid of the lobotomy because it was such an abhorrent image and it was so obviously a form of torture and assault. Electroshock is equally a form of torture and assault. We just haven't gotten rid of it yet. And we need to take action and require the FDA to ban this device, which has never been proven safe or effective.
This is an atrocity that should never have gone as far as it has. It's just a mass experimentation, and the FDA does nothing. They need to be held accountable.
La tech deve essere denunciata come tortura e come violazione barbarica dei diritti umani. Il nostro futuro dipende da questo. Unisciti al Comitato dei cittadini per i diritti umani per chiamare l'elettroshock con il suo vero nome, un crimine contro l'umanità. Se tu o un conoscente siete stati danneggiati dai trattamenti di elettroshock o se vuoi fare qualcosa a riguardo, agisci e fatti sentire. Contatta il CCDU.